So Ryan, it's really good to see you. The reason I wanted to invite you today and interview you is because I loved your training with Management 3.0, the fundamentals workshop, and I was so lucky that I had the opportunity to attend it. With the lockdown situation, everything is virtual, so I was able to attend it even though you're in the UK. Thank you so much for joining.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining.
So, Ryan, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, okay. So I think you've touched on some of what I do, which is management training, leadership training, in the agile space. So I started my career in engineering, not even software engineering, just engineering, and then moved into software engineering, and then realized that really the difference that I was making in organizations was the ability to talk to people, which a lot of my colleagues couldn't do to such an extent. And so I moved more into project management, business analysis, and so on, and then wanted to go even further into understanding people further, deeper, more psychologically, trained in coaching and various psychological and coaching methodologies, and eventually ended up calling myself an agile coach before many people were doing that. And I now run an organization called Touch Think, which is a lot about helping organizations and people and teams to continuously improve. And that can be on the dimensions of the processes that they use, the ways that they interact with each other, the change that they're undergoing, and helping them navigate the difficulty and the complexity of that change. So it's anything to do with helping people get from where they are now to where they want to be, and helping them know where that possibility could be, where they could go. And so it involves working with individuals, with teams, with senior managers, right across the board.
Wow, you have a breadth of experience. There's a lot going on there in terms of you have the technical side, you have the business side, and you played all those different roles, which I do encounter people in a similar situation where they would be developers and then they would dabble with business analysis and product management and coaching. What would you say out of all of these kind of fields is the most interesting to you?
Yeah, interestingly, I named my organization Touch Think, which, if you think of the two words, it's touch points more towards the, and the symbol is a yin yang, so it points more towards the kind of emotional side, the human aspect, whereas think is more the mental side, the systems, the processes, the tools that we use, and so on. And really, if you think of the yin yang symbol, the two kind of morph into each other. And so a lot of work professionals focus on either one or the other. And I think for me, it's the intersection of the two that's really brings a holistic view. And so that's primarily my interest, is how do we not do what a lot of us engineers were trained to do, which is to work on systems, processes, and tools, forgetting that the people who use these systems, processes, and tools bring their own psychology, their emotions, whatever's going on for them in their lives, and so on, and their skills and their innate strengths. So for me, what's interesting is constantly, at every moment in time, bringing both of those aspects into whatever I do. So it's a much more holistic and what's sometimes called a systemic approach, which is trying to bring all elements of the system, whether that be human elements, processes, systems, tools, into what we do, because it's all there all the time. So ignoring part of it means you're actually ignoring part of the system.
It sounds like when I look at your LinkedIn profile that the area that you identify yourself the most, or what you go by, is Agile Coach / Trainer. So it sounds like coaching is your purpose or your passion. Can you tell us what was the defining moment for you that you decided that this is something that you were meant to be doing?
Yeah, I think it was incremental. So I always knew that I was a frustrated engineer. Um, and when I joined an engineering company that needed a website, I took the opportunity straight away to build that and speak to all the stakeholders, and um, found that um, I had found something that did blend the two, because the web by its nature is very human interface related. And so I needed to understand the psychology of people and understand the business. And it was a very holistic exercise to build the engineering company's website. Um, and that then sort of evolved into me going more and more into that direction. A few defining moments. I think training in professional coaching really got me to understand how to that forcing change upon people is never going to work. And I think there was a big shift in me, together with the Management 3.0 that you talked about, which is really understanding what the intelligence is of the system, rather than me as the coach or the manager uh, being the one who tries to enforce my rule onto the system. So understanding the innate skills, potential, creativity of the client or the client system, whatever that might be. I think that was a big shift in my thinking, and got me to really move much more into that direction of a coach who is there as an enabler, rather than someone who's there to install systems, processes, and tools based on some particular um, agenda that I might have.
That makes sense. And speaking of Management 3.0, I'm so curious to know, what are your top three intrinsic motivators or moving motivators?
Yeah, for me, it's always been freedom's been number one. So I think they, as you may have experienced, they change from time to time. There might be some drift, but the kind of there tends to be the ones that stay in the highest, regardless of what's going on in your life. And I think what brought me to working for myself and uh, has always been freedom. So autonomy, as some others might call it. So that's always been my top, and then purpose is always also probably second. So having a goal, what's in Move and Motivate is called goal, but really I see as purpose. And I think curiosity. I read a lot. I'm always interested in expanding my learning. So curiosity, freedom, and purpose.
Wow. And for those who want to get into coaching, um, what are some things that you would say that would help them make that decision? When do you advise people not to get into coaching?
Yeah. So, well, firstly, let's just make some distinction between professional coaching and agile coaching, where professional coaching is one element of agile coaching, and agile coaching obviously requires further skills of facilitating, mentoring, teaching, consulting, um, but as well as, of course, expertise in certain domains of agile. Um, but I think primarily it's a desire to serve. So um, if that's not your thing, then coaching's not going to be um, really for you. At the same time, I would say that what in one of the models I developed called the House of Agile Coaching, the base of the house is a coaching approach, and I think that's something that all humans can benefit from having, which is whether you're, regardless of what your role is, but particularly if you're involved in some kind of leadership or change or management, really adopting the perspective that um, uh, people will only change if they're intrinsically motivated to change. And so adopting an approach whereby we first seek to understand what what the natural drives in people are, as you mentioned, intrinsic motivators, as well as what direction they would like to go in. And starting from that standpoint can always help all workers, no matter who you are, because we know that people will resist change unless they're intrinsically motivated towards it. So whilst not everyone is cut out for coaching, I think everyone's cut out to or can benefit from adopting a coaching approach. The other thing I would say is if you want to be a coach and include more coaching in your work, it is a minefield out there in terms of there's so many people now calling themselves coaches, and there's a lot of emphasis also on accreditation and certification and so on and so forth. But I think a lot of it can be channeled towards certain popular approaches. And for me, what's made the biggest difference is looking at a whole range of approaches rather than just one or two, because that can then reinforce this mindset of just systems and tools and processes. Like if I do this, if I learn nonviolent communication and I do that on people, then I'll get the results that I want. So it becomes this sort of process rather than really understanding people. So I would say take a 360-degree view of different models, different methods. Try to read as much as you can, understand as much as you can, if coaching is something that you really want to do.
Yeah, and it sounds like from an agile coaching perspective, you're not necessarily recommending one framework or one certification or one training in particular. You're talking about, looking at a holistic approach and also digging deep into the people side of things, which is something that I love about Management 3.0, because it doesn't dictate do Scrum or do Kanban. It's more of a mindset approach.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. I think the other thing you touched on earlier, which is the when you were saying that you have a leaning towards one-to-one coaching, is also understanding where our individual leanings are. For me, one-to-one coaching is more an addendum to what I do or supports what I do, where primarily my leaning is towards working with teams and teams of teams. That's where I feel most at home, and everyone is going to have more of a leaning towards one side or the other. So that's another area to understand. I mean, agile coaching is very holistic, so we need to be able to do both. And then also knowing that different coaches will have different leanings.
Makes sense. And where would you say is your area of mastery in terms of domain? Is it more on the technical side, the transformation side, the business side? Where does it lie?
Yeah, so that's good. So another one of the models I developed, the pentagons of agile coaching. So one is the skills, which we talked about, and then the other one is the practice domains. And so there we've got technical practices, team processes like Scrum, Kanban, etc., multi-team processes like scaled agile and so on, and then change transformation and product management. I would say mine are less in the technical space as it was in my early days. I have enough of an understanding to be able to work in those contexts and understand the language and what the top areas to focus on in a technical sense are. But certainly it's also then evolved to initially working mostly on the team level, and then more recently on the, or let's say a few years back on the multi-team level, working a lot in the scaled agile domain, and then lately working a lot with the change transformation side of things. So how do we help to put change in place for the better for everyone and include everyone in that process? Is yeah, I would say. So possibly my mastery is still in the area of multi-teams and product management, the focus recently has moved more towards the change transformation.
Very cool. I hear a lot of debate around Scrum Master versus Agile Coach, and what is the difference? And is a Scrum Master a more junior Agile Coach? What's your take on that?
I think to a certain degree it doesn't matter, and a certain degree it does, because we do what we are, and labels can sometimes get in the way. We just do what we do. At the same time, these are not terms that are that have kind of bodies behind them reserving them as terms. So for example, to call yourself a professional engineer, you need to have a professional engineer. In most systems, you would need to have a professional engineering body accrediting you. In Agile Coaching and Scrum Mastery, yes, you can become a certified Scrum Master, and there's different levels depending on which body you align to, and that can be helpful for others to kind of see your dedication and your commitment. And then in the Agile Coaching space, maybe a little bit less. There are some certifications that we can go through in some paths and so on, including the ones that I train people in through IC Agile. But at the same time, it's very difficult to assess an individual based on certification alone. And so, and then coming back to your question about what's the relationship between the two. So, yes, on the one hand, some people see this path of, well, first you kind of work as a Scrum Master because you're kind of working with a team, and you're helping to facilitate team practices and so on. And then at some point you might evolve to an Agile Coach, which is kind of a more advanced Scrum Master, or someone who works with perhaps some people would say multiple teams. I don't know if we can clearly say that is the case, because these terms are quite loosely used, and the term Agile Coach was kind of something that was developed mostly through a couple of authors and then evolved into other terminologies over time. So I would say see it as and also to say that there's, Scrum is just one method. So I would say don't focus too much on them. Rather be who you are, and use the skills that you have. And if they nicely fit into some of the definitions of what a Scrum Master and Agile Coach are, then choose the ones that are most appropriate to you. I know that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but if I gave you anything more that sounded more concrete, it would imply that there is something more concrete where there isn't.
That is so true, and it's such a struggle, because organizations, when they try to hire people, they have to put things in a box. Exactly. And write job descriptions, and then going into engagements as Agile coaches and Scrum Masters, we know that, but we have to work with it and somehow navigate the system. Yeah. What is your advice for companies when they try to hire coaches and Scrum Masters? What should they look for? Yeah. The best way to describe that is to speak in the negative first, to say what they shouldn't look for. And that's certainly not looking for someone who will roll out a prescribed set of rules, systems, processes, and tools, but rather someone who comes from a lot of experience. And I know that's it's a bit of chicken and egg, because it takes time to get experience, and in order to get that experience you have to do it, but
as long as you've got that experience in your organization, you can then through mentorship build people up to be good in those roles. But you would need at least one or some people who are very experienced in it to really benefit from agile coaching, because it's such a holistic discipline, because it involves and requires individuals to have both their emotional intelligence as well as the domain expertise, as well as all the different skills of facilitating, coaching, teaching, etc., mentoring, and so on. You want a multidisciplinary person, and someone who's been there, done that, preferably has case studies that they can walk you through, and explain what they've done, but not in a way that was knew all the answers from the outset. So in other words, what I always say is someone who eats their own dog food. So if we're teaching agile and proponents of agile methods and inspecting and adapting, then we need to apply that to ourselves and to the way that we work. And so I have a process whereby whenever I go into an organization, I talk to them first about what it is that they want, what's working for them, what's not working for them, and what after a period of observation and lots of listening, and sitting in on meetings and observing and analyzing, and then might come back and say, here's the first thing I would suggest trying, and I'll try it with you, and let's see how that goes. And then let's look back at that and see how that went, and then keep iterating over that. Organizations who are hiring agile coaches would want to check for that in the individual. Is that the approach that the individual would be taking, or do they seem to know all the answers without even knowing the context?
That makes sense. And it becomes very challenging for organizations that are going through transformation and have no experience in Agile. So how would they sort of, determine if that person is a good fit and will help them through their transformation?
I think that, so the first thing is, to check their approach, and whether that is their approach is to first listen, to understand, to observe, and then to iterate. Beyond that, of course, you would want them to be chosen not just on the basis of one or two or even three individuals within the company choosing to hire the person. You'd want them to spend time talking to everyone in the organization and then get their feedback and so on, to see whether that's someone that they could really work with, because you really need to be able to trust the people that are here to help you. And that's not to say that everyone's going to welcome you with open arms, but if there's so much resistance from the start, it's probably best to walk away, or to choose another individual, if you're an employer. Other than that, all the skills that I've already described and the practice areas, you would want to have a high degree in most of those areas. It's not reasonable to expect an agile coach to be an expert in all of the skills and all of the practice domains, but a high level in all of them, and at least a desire to keep expanding into them would be necessary. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like having the permission to coach is one of the requirements to getting into an agile coaching engagement. And I love your approach of having the team, interview the individual, and not just having a manager or a director, interview and bring that coach and force them on the team, but having, the organization or as much as we can to kind of interview that person and ensure it's fit, because I feel that coaching is it's very relationship based, and it's kind of like going to a doctor or working with a personal trainer. We have to feel comfortable with that person, and we have to feel vulnerable. So there needs to be a fit from a personality perspective. So that makes a lot of sense. So what do you advise individuals who want to get their foot into being a Scrum Master or an Agile coach? Like, Can someone be a Scrum Master or an Agile Coach right out of school? Do they need to have years of experience first in a certain area before they get in? What is your advice?
I would say anyone who has a desire and an interest in the areas that we've talked about, particularly the intersection between people and process, to look into it further. I think for me anyway, it's been because people, I see this a lot. People ask me what's the kind of next step, and I think rather than seeing it as a kind of a linear stage progression, people will naturally be at different stages in terms of their readiness to work with teams and other people. And you mentioned coming out of school versus waiting and getting more experience first. I think that's quite individual, and also quite interdisciplinary or cross-disciplinary, so that people who excel in these kind of roles don't necessarily come from, say, the software arena or discipline. In fact, quite often they don't, and that's an advantage because they have less perhaps of the biases of that team or that industry, and can bring a fresh approach and diversity of perspective and so on. People who come from disciplines or areas or trainings or education related to systems, behavior, management, leadership, organizational development, often excel in these kind of roles. The domain that you're in, so Agile is beyond software now. So if you're coming from a marketing background and you feel the pull to want to work in helping them be more effective in the way that they work, and less wasteful and more creative, and less bound by traditional processes which are constraining them or causing them huge delays and rework and so on. I think that desire needs to come from within you to want to change. I mean, I think for me, for example, I went into engineering because I wanted to help people to be more effective and productive and less wasteful, and then use that to help teams and organizations to do the same. That would be I would say the driving force behind wanting to go into it. And then follow your nose and your heart, because you'll get pulled into the areas just organically. I mean, for me, I was naturally drawn into management, coaching. I studied an MBA because I wanted to have a more holistic view of organizations. So that's a very strong indicator of a pull towards this, because the more we can be systems thinkers and see organizations holistically, the better we'll be as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, rather than being the type of manager or team leader who is just focused on protecting your team or looking after the interests of your team, because ultimately a team is always working within a complex system.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I work with a lot of clients from a career coaching perspective, and some of the things they say to me, especially when they're a new grad, oh, I gotta be sure about what I get into, because I'm scared that I'm going to be pigeonholed, or I'm going to waste years of my life doing this. And if I want to pivot, it's going to be difficult. And that's something that I do agree with, is that you have to follow your heart, and it's an organic process. And just because you go into one direction, doesn't mean that it was a waste. You can actually transfer a lot of the knowledge, and it benefits you and brings in a lot of perspective that others wouldn't have. So that is definitely valuable. And it
Yeah.
sounds like there isn't a, one size fit for all path. You can come in from a development perspective. You can be a developer, and then find that you want to improve people's ways of working. So you um, get into becoming an Agile coach or Scrum master. You could be a business analyst, and maybe that kind of draws in your business mastery, and you can kind of incorporate that into your coaching. And it sounds like even if you're not building products or in the software development, you can still be an Agile coach. And I guess the buzzword is business agility.
Mm.
And you just bring that into, whatever organization, like marketing, and just improve the way they operate and their response to change. Yeah,
Absolutely.
that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Marketing, finance, HR, operations. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about how your training kind of helps people in that aspect?
Yeah. So, are you talking more about the Agile Coach Facilitator trainings? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. We
Training,
can
yeah.
we can start with that.
Yeah. So yeah. So those are designed around. IC Agile is the organization that created the learning objectives, and then we create the trainings ourselves to meet those learning objectives. They're based around, and particularly the way that I designed or we designed the training, are based around looking at individuals and teams and the system as a whole. So we first start by helping people to learn the skills of professional coaching, because if we start there, the rest can build on top of that. If we go straight to teaching skills of, say, mentoring and teaching and so on, those are already to some degree quite directive skills. And most people are more familiar with more directive approaches to work, because that's how our work tends to be designed. We have people who have titles of manager or leader or team lead and so on, and these are the people that we tend to turn to tell us what to do. If we start by learning the skills of professional coaching, we kind of reverse that process, and we say, well, you tell me, as a client or as a customer or as a team member, you're intelligent enough, and I trust you. You tell me where you feel you'd like to go, and both as an individual and as a team. So we start first on the individual level, and we learn those skills. And once we've learned those skills in, say, the first day and a half, and practice them a lot, we then move on to looking at the team. Because with teams, we have team dynamics, we have personalities, we have different strengths we have to work with and adapt to within the team, for the benefit of the team as a whole. And we have many different models that can help us to understand our strengths, our weaknesses, the behavior patterns that get in the way, and so on. So we move to that level. At the moment, I'm describing mostly the coaching course. The facilitation course I'll get onto afterwards, and then after that we move on to the system as a whole. And that's where we move into the realm of really understanding the invisible forces within a team, within a system. It's very difficult to speak about these. We need to actually experience them. So actually live there in the classroom, we work with those invisible forces within a team and within a system and within an organization that actually often have the most pull on us. So looking at forces of belonging within a team, of the exchange between individuals within a team, and if you're giving more, if you're giving less within a team, and how that affects the team and the system as a whole. What's our right place within a team or within a system, within an organization. So it goes quite deep into the areas of systemic forces. The facilitation course has a different focus. That's more focused really on being a good facilitator of meetings. So how, both before, during, and after a meeting, how do we maximize how we work with our teams in the art of facilitation? And surprise, surprise, a lot of the work is actually done outside of the actual meetings themselves. So, for
Wow.
example, when I'm working with a team as a facilitator, or even just facilitating a workshop, I'll spend maybe 1/10 of my time actually in the meeting, and the other 90% of the time will be spent preparing. Um, so there's a lot of emphasis on that, as well as, again, the behavioral elements during a meeting. So how do we draw out the most from everyone within the meeting, within the workshop, for maximum benefit of the team? That's in a nutshell how it's all structured.
And I'm sure there's a lot more that you aren't able to cover in this short amount of time. But these are definitely valuable skills that you would not get just, getting if you are in the agile space and in the product development space, you wouldn't just get from your certified Scrum Master. These are skills that are very important and are above just having the lean kind of foundation and agile knowledge. I myself, as I was in engagement, struggled with knowing how to facilitate meetings, requirement gathering meetings effectively to, get decisions. And I'm sure there's like cool and innovative ways to kind of do that, to draw all that information from your stakeholders. But facilitation is one of the most important skills in the agile world, because we spend a lot of time in meetings and we collaborate a lot, and it's really a useful tool to have, and important skill to have.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you hit the nail on the head with the sort of, I mean, obviously with the Scrum Master training, it depends on who your trainer is, and everyone will have different emphases, to be fair. But in general, it's that would teach you more the mechanics, and then our courses, or the facilitator course, the difference between that and, say, Scrum Master course was, it's really how to actually facilitate those mechanics. So how to actually be in a room or online with a team or a team of teams, and how to really get the most from that, which in my experience of Scrum Master training, I didn't get that. I learned a lot about Scrum and how Scrum works, but I didn't get much time actually practicing with in given real scenarios with a team and getting feedback. I think that's one thing we focus a lot on, is getting feedback in a safe way from our peers in terms of our facilitation, understanding our style, understanding where we get tripped up as facilitators, and so on.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's difficult to cram all of this valuable information and act out these scenarios in, during the certified Scrum course. There's a lot of content to cover already, so you definitely need, how many days is your facilitation class?
Well, the two back-to-back are 5 days. So the facilitation is 2 days, and the coach is 3 days. But what we're clear is that we would expect a prior knowledge of common agile patterns and methods and so on coming into these trainings, because we want to get straight into actually doing it and practicing and giving the context. So say, the context we're going to work with now is a planning meeting, or the context we're going to work with now is a retrospective or a stand-up meeting. And so we'll work with all of those contexts, but we don't expect someone to put their hand up and say, excuse me, what's a retrospective, before we go into that. So people who we say typically at least 6 months experience as a practitioner in the field. So we get straight into it, but you're absolutely right. I mean, even no matter what it is, no training course will you come out being proficient. I mean, IC Agile has a learning path where you do knowledge-based certificates, which is the ones that we teach, and then you can then apply for a competence-based certificate. But that requires a lot more practice, experience, testimonials from clients that you've worked with, written submissions, and so on, so that they can actually verify your competence in the field. But that can take months, usually I would say typically years at least, to get to that point where you could say you're kind of proficient in a particular domain of agility. And even then, that's only one domain of agility, in this case agile coaching and facilitation. There's so many more beyond that.
I mean, my favorite certifications are the Agile Team Facilitation and the Agile Coaching, because I did learn a lot of, from the Lisa Atkins framework, or the Agile Coaching Institute framework. It did teach me a lot of those process and content skill sets that I wouldn't have gotten just from my certified Scrum Master class. But are there other classes that you recommend that helped you as an Agile coach that you would recommend to others to look into?
I mean, mine's been kind of like a winding journey over many years. And I think I can only speak for myself, really. I mean, the ones that had big impact, I mean, definitely, actually, interestingly, doing an MBA many years ago did make a big difference, because the MBA that I chose was one which was very holistic and very multidisciplinary. So I didn't focus in one particular area, and that can be very helpful to understand all areas of the business. As you mentioned, business agility earlier on requires firstly understanding of the ways that businesses interact. The professional coaching, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of agile coaches are now, or want to be agile coaches, are now training in professional coaching skills. As I mentioned earlier, that can be quite sort of a narrow path. There tend to be ICF. I have no problem with the ICF, but it does tend to have a particular slant on, or similar types of accrediting bodies do have certain slants in coaching. What I've found is kind of looking more left and right. So kind of NLP was very helpful. Recently, I focused a lot on systemic coaching, constellations work. Very beneficial in the invisible forces that I was mentioning earlier, and understanding those. Management 3.0, as I mentioned, which I've also been a facilitator of for 7 years and run regular trainings in that. But that's really helped to think about the complexity of systems and organizations. Lean change, very helpful too. Leanchange.org. Really has a lot of really useful canvases to really understand all the elements of change that need to be taken into account, and then work on it in an agile and iterative way, rather than the kind of more traditional change and having a linear path of what we expect, where we are now and where we expect to be in the future, which of course gives us a false sense of security that we're going to change from point A to point B, whereas the reality is that we don't know, and we need to be able to work with that uncertainty. So lean change is very helpful in that. There's probably a few that I've left out, but
that's a lot of valuable resources that you've given us, and a great starting point. I'm sure, if people look at your profile, they're going to see an alphabet of certifications. So
I am a bit of a junkie of certificate, not just certificates, but like courses and workshops and so on. And actually, I think there's a lot that's not there on my profile. That's,
oh my goodness.
On top of there. But that's my curiosity at play, and it's not because any one of them actually. Because again, the question that I often get is, what should I do? And it's more for me. It's just because I'm really interested in it that I do it, and they've all been helpful in different ways.
And Ryan, the question that I get is it going to get me a job? Is it going to make me more desirable to employers? And I give the same answer. I say, are you going to learn? It depends on what you want to get into. It depends on your interests, what you want to specialize in. So
exactly.
Yeah.
So don't objectify it too much, rather subjectify it. And what is it that you want? Precisely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very true. And another question that I keep getting from people is, do I need to be technical to be a Scrum Master or an Agile coach in the, product development world? What's your take on that?
Yeah. Um, in the product development world, again, that product development is still reasonably broad. So when we say technical, typically we're thinking of the roots of Agile
Coding.
in the software space, coding. Um, um, Again, so it's hard for me to talk without referring to my experience. I mean, yes, it has been very beneficial to have come from a technical background. Particularly, I spent a lot of time in the e-commerce space, and so now anything related to the web, online, when I'm working on those kind of digital products, it's I would say at least it helps me to get um, the respect of my teams that I'm working with, because there tends to sometimes be a bias amongst technical people that if the people working with them are not technical, then they're kind of the others. We're the techies, and then everyone else, the managers or whatever else it might be. So that can help me in the early stages as a coach, a scrum master coming in and working with an organization. Is when I speak to different people, I can understand their perspective and empathize with them and the challenges that they face and the struggles that they face, because I've been there. So that can be helpful. Is it a necessity? No, because when I actually start to work with them, I try my hardest, and now I don't even have to try so much, not to not get into the detail of the work that they do. They're the experts in that. So only as far as knowing the basics, and if you don't have that, then I would spend some time with teams, whatever, pro bono or however you could do it, shadowing, to be able to speak the very basics of the language, in the sense of understanding their, for want of a better term, their life cycle processes, the basic terminology, and if you've got that, it can actually be a help not to know the details of the work, because then the pull to want to try to get into the content, when really you should be facilitating or holding the process, or guiding them through the flow of their work, rather than the content and the details of their work. So where I've actually seen Scrum Masters get tripped up is when they have come from a team member and then being a Scrum Master, and then not being able to remove themselves from trying to fix the problems of the team, when really it's the team who's fixing their own problems or avoiding those problems in the first place.
That makes sense. And that's something that I kind of help my clients when they try to decide. So I get this a lot, where should I be a product manager or an agile coach? And my first question to them is, are you comfortable not influencing product decisions or prioritizing the product or having a say on how the product is designed? And when they say no, that's when I say, well, maybe you should reconsider.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings me into, in your perspective, how would you how did you decide? Because I see that you were a product manager at some point. How do you kind of help people decide if they should go into product management or agile coaching? What is the difference between the two? And it becomes also complex nowadays, because it almost feels like the product manager is a hybrid role in the Scrum world of PO and Scrum Master, and then there's the pure, product owner role. Would you able to like shed some light on that?
Yeah, I mean, so firstly, I was never actually a product manager per se in my role. I was project manager at one
Oh,
point. There was
okay.
a title that I had, but that's a really interesting distinction. So I started my career working in software development houses. So we had a whole number of clients, and we would serve them all. And so I was managing multiple teams at a time, at multiple projects at a time, and I was sort of the project manager. And I brought in, through my natural style, ways of not kind of being the person who dishes out work, but kind of holds the whole system kind of in balance by helping to be the liaison with clients where appropriate, to help design processes and systems that people could do the best with they can do, and so on. So in that sense, you could say that I was helping with the product management of the system and of the organization, so that they could have smooth product flow through. But the obviously, as you know, the product owner and the product manager are the ones who are actually making those product decisions. So anyway, so that's the basic distinction for me of a project manager and product manager. The product managers and product owners that I've worked best with are ones who are, of course, passionate about the product, can really have a good eye for making those calls between different feature prioritizations, and driving the direction of the product, primarily in conjunction with others. And that's where it becomes an interesting, who is the product manager, who's the product owner, and is it a team of people or one individual, and so on. And really, I think that that's contextual. So as long as you have some kind of a understanding, or a fairly good understanding, about how product decisions are made as a team, as an organization, that's the most important thing. People get very hardlined about, well, it should be the product owner makes the decisions, or the product manager makes the decisions. Different organizations will have completely opposite names for this exact same role. So in one organization, what a product owner does is called a product manager in the other organization, and vice versa. So it can become very confusing. So does that matter? Yes, to a degree, because we're talking also about careers here. So how do you know what you're going for? But I think it makes it even more important to be clear about, just like the Scrum Master Agile Coach conversation we had earlier, is about what exactly are we talking about beyond the labels. So really getting to the detail about what we're talking about here. So I've worked a lot with the scaled Agile framework, for example, and there you would say have a product manager at a higher level, higher level decision making than the product owner. But depending on the context you're in, you might not want to use the labels of a particular framework. You might want to adapt them to the context to help them make more sense, or maybe for historical reasons the organization has had a certain naming convention. So you could either turn that on its head, or kind of morph that in such a way that it works for that organization. Yeah, what do you think of this?
I feel that it's a very it's with Agile coaching, right? There's no one size that fits all, and I get a lot of questions around, do I need to be technical? Do I need to come from a development background? And my answer is, are you passionate about product? And it depends on, again, the organization and what role you play. If you're working side by side with an architect, then maybe you don't need to be as technical. If the expectation is that you're going to design the architecture or the technical solution along with the developers, then maybe you need to be technical. So it really depends on how the organization is laid out. From my experience, I played the product manager role for a little bit of time. And I was paired with an architect, but I do have a software engineering background. I do know a little bit enough on how architectures work and how we develop software. So it did help a lot. I would say maybe I would have been a bit at a disadvantage if I didn't understand the process of developing software. But I didn't need to be extremely technical to be successful. As long as I had an eye for design and I had a skill in terms of knowing how to articulate the product vision and prioritizing and not hoarding features, then then I think that's what's really important.
Yeah, and I think you raised a really important relationship there between product manager and architect and architecture, and if that's a really symbiotic relationship, no matter how it works, as long as it works really well, then um, that's where I've seen the best successes, because they're working really in tandem, and the trade-offs that they're making between them are the right trade-offs to be made, rather than one just pulling for their needs and the other pulling for their needs. Yeah.
Yeah. So Ryan, where would people find you to get all these amazing resources, and what do you have any upcoming training that's coming up?
Yeah, so the best place to find me is still LinkedIn, although the company website has been a long time in the making and is finally launching next month. The best place to go is LinkedIn, and training wise, you could probably find upcoming trainings there. Otherwise, on the IC Agile website, you'll find the organization that I run, called TouchThink, and you have all our listings there. Likewise, Management 3.0 website, you'll find me on there for those trainings. Yeah, but it's soon to become, they'll all be on touchthink.com.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan, for all of your knowledge and your experience. And I attended Ryan's Management 3.0 training. It was phenomenal. And I definitely recommend it for anyone, whether you're in the Agile space or whether you want to, collaborate with your team members more effectively, if you're an emerging leader. I mean, we all are leaders in a way, and we have to drive change in the organization. And I also recommend, organizations to bring you in and have you facilitate those types of trainings, because they will definitely improve the morale and the motivation. So thank you so much for your time and for sharing all this valuable information with us today.
Thank you, Nada. It's been great, and keep doing the good work that you're doing.
Thank you.